Kristen asked what governments can do. Governments can liberate and enable the new technologies in ways they don't always. We have, as I mentioned earlier, done everything we can to speed permitting, to make the necessary connective infrastructure happen more quickly. What is more ironic than to see self-styled advocates of green technology practice not in my backyard obstruction when some actually shows up in their neighborhood. So all these things government can and should do. We're trying very aggressively to do that. But I would just observe that there are many policies on offer that are so costly, so destructive of the economy that has to pay for all this, that they would be very self-defeating, I believe, if pursued all too far. Not to change the subject, but certainly our country, and the States, faces enormous challenges simply to sustain, let alone resume the growth of its economy, which we're looking to pay for the leadership Dr. Schell calls for, and to lubricate this transition to the transformed economy that we all hope will one day arrive. And this we have to be careful not to shoot ourselves in every extremity here. There's some risk of that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Touching on this, job loss in both the U.S. and China has been significant over the last year. In the U.S., it's created a lot of issues when combined with the housing market crisis and a lot of other challenges that we face. And in China, leaders here are very much concerned about social unrest, as you have a large migrant population that's actually leaving the cities and in cases moving back to the rural areas. Under this sort of context, this very particular point in time, how do we look for short-term ways to move the green jobs economy forward? I think a lot of what we're talking about is very long-term in nature. We won't have a cost of carbon or price for carbon in China or the U.S. Anytime in the next few years. So what are some of the intermediate opportunities that we can take to not only provide economic opportunities for individuals, but for both of our countries together?
Well, this is not an area that I'm particularly knowledgeable about, but I think we do see in the U.S. stimulus packages precisely this kind of an effort. But of course it does have limits. You can't just keep borrowing money and spending it. But these kinds of situations are characteristic of great shifts, when you're sort of in between one system and another system. And I don't think we yet have a clear answer, but I think we all feel that the future, insofar as it's going to be a positive one, will probably lie in these new kinds of green industries. The question is, how do you get there? How do you make this transition? Your precise question. Now, I know, Governor Daniels, you're wrestling with this exact question, and this is what gives you cause. You recognize the finitude of resources. And how do you hang in there until the new world arrives?
Yeah, I defer certainly to Dr. Schell about events in China, but and I wouldn't push the analogy too far, but I suggested earlier that in Indiana we look at certain policies as that would be imposed on us, along with a disproportionate percentage of the costs, as close to imperialistic, and not inclined to go along, certainly, when, in the case of cap and trade as now designed, by its own science or its own computer models, wouldn't do anything about the problem that we worry about. So when I think about China being pressed to take certain steps at this early stage of its own growth, I ask myself in Chinese shoes why I'd agree to that. Dr. Schell, I think you said the greatest problem, there's no problem bigger than climate change. I'm not sure that's right. our country faces an enormous problem to sustain its standard of living, let alone grow at a level that will keep an interconnected world growing. I can only imagine the economic challenge as seen from here in China, trying to lift up a great people of 1.3 billion. And the difficulties of doing that, we can't pay in the United States for the obligations we've already taken on for the future. The difficulty of doing that, to me, looms even larger. The costs of that are much more imminent, and the threat that failing to deal with the economic challenge poses is far more certain. It's as certain as demography and actuarial science. Far more certain than the one we fear from CO2.
You know, I think it's actually, to have you here, Governor Daniels, is extremely important. It's very easy, as I think you even suggested, to get a lot of visionary thinking that flies away from the practicalities of the matter. But I do think it's also worth pointing out that you are a governor of a state, and you have immediate concerns. In other words, you are looking, and you have to look at the short term. But there should be some people who are looking at the long term, because I think it's undeniable that the costs in the long term of not being able to do anything about the question of global warming are going to be enormous. Mm-hmm. So your successor may end up having a bill come due because we don't have any solution on the horizon that you might have eluded. And I'm wondering how you analyze that whole sort of prospect.
Well, first of all, where I come from, we are Americans first and Hoosiers second, and if we become convinced that something's in the interest of the whole of the United States, and we're going to be for it, even if it bears heavily on us. We've not been thus convinced so far. Or I'd say I'm certainly more convinced that we've got a larger challenge, again, that I think is so tied to this. If we can't pay the bills of today, if we can't grow the economy at a way that brings people back to work and employs our children at a higher standard of living, then we're never going to pay for the necessary costs of this transition. These are non-economic technologies right now, and as much as we all might wish, people don't migrate to them freely. Every time it's tried, it fails. I was on the board of a utility 10 or 12 years ago with idealistic zeal. We put out a green offer, you know, if you'll pay a little extra, you'll get all your electricity from renewable sources. Nobody took it. Somebody just tried it in Texas. Nobody took it. You know, these things have got to be paying propositions, and that's going to take subsidy. Everywhere I look in the world of green tech, it takes subsidy right now. Okay, fine up to a point. Who's going to pay for the subsidies? How are we going to do that when we have these other issues and other bills we've already taken on? So I'm sorry if I left the impression that we're either thinking provincially or short term. You know, I'd argue that we're trying our best to think globally, not just nationally, and long term. But I see some barriers that I don't think wishfulness should lead us to leap right over.